Yeah. Hi everyone, thank you for joining. We'll wait a couple more minutes for everyone to join. And meanwhile, as we're approaching the end of the semester, I know it's been a little bit crazy. So we'd love to know which has been your favorite class this semester. What subject have you enjoyed the most? You can leave your answers in the chat if you want.
I don't think people had a favorite class this semester.
Eric's design theory. Okay, a lot of design classes. Nice. Design theory is a popular one. Yeah, mine was graphic design too. I think it was really different from all the classes I've taken so far in HCI.
I see Jonathan popping in. Hello, welcome to the
Hey,
panel discussion.
Jonathan.
Hi, you
Hi.
all. How are you guys doing? Happy Friday.
Great. A bit packed and hectic. How about you? How about you, Jonathan? How's your Friday?
Good so far. Yeah, looking forward to the weekend.
Okay, I think we'll get started. Hi everyone. We're super excited for everyone to be here, and we're really looking forward to hearing from the panelists. Let's start off with a little bit of the team introduction, and then we'll pass it over to the panelists. My name is Paromita. I am the lead intern for the web design team here at CWIT. I am a second year graduate student in the Human Computer Interaction program, graduating very, very soon. And yeah, we're really happy. This is our last event. Yeah, we'll be graduating soon. So there will be two more positions open for interns. If you're interested, please do apply through the website. And yeah, with that, I'll pass it over to Fatima.
Hi everyone. I'm Fatima Rafiki. I am a second year graduate student pursuing a degree in human computer interaction and design. I am Parumita's classmate and I will be graduating very soon too on May 7th. So excited to be here. I can't believe it's almost been a year conducting these events and hosting these workshops for you all. We have some amazing speakers lined up today, Kate, Levi, and Jonathan, and we are very excited to learn from you all. So, yeah, over to you, eBay.
Yeah, hi everyone. So my name is eBay and I'm studying in undergraduate school, majoring in comprehensive design, interactive and digital multimedia. So I will not be graduating soon, so I will be keep working on the design team next year as well. So I'm excited to be working with some of you guys hopefully next semester.
Thank you, Iba and Fatima. As part of CWED, our mission is to empower women to be leaders in technical fields, no matter their background. And so, yeah, we do host a lot of design workshops. You can be a part of our community by joining our mailing list or join our Facebook group. We'll leave all those links in the chat. And with that, let's get started. I'll pass it over to Kate to introduce herself, and then we'll hear from all the speakers.
I'm Kate Robinson. So I'm an experienced architect with the Digital Campus Design and Infrastructure Group, which is part of IU Studios. And so my role is to kind of just help look at the overall experience for IU's Digital Campus and help improve that. And then I also actually act as the champion for the web design team for CWIT. So.
Levi, oh yeah, Jonathan, go ahead.
Cool. Hi, my name is Jonathan Uribe. I'm a staff product designer at Okta. Okta is I guess we're known for like our SSO, single sign-on, but we have a lot of products, things around cybersecurity, governance, identity management. Before Okta, I was at LinkedIn for 2 years. And before LinkedIn, I worked for a lot of early stage startups. So yeah, it's been probably like 4 or 5 years working for early stage startups, being the only designer, wearing multiple hats. Yeah, that's my super quick, brief description.
And my name is Levi McGranahan. I'm the design systems lead in IU Studios. I work in a group that sort of reports up through the IT, the University Information Technology Services. So there's kind of enterprise software development side of it, and then also I report up through the half of the marketing and communications vice president also. So I work on a lot of websites and things like that, and everything in between. I've been working on the design system. We've for about 2-3 years now, so it's been a slow kind of build to a point where we're starting on the second version that's sort of rolling out to a much wider audience over the next year, the whole university, in fact. So that's it.
Okay, thank you so much for your introductions, everyone. Let's get started with our first question. So I think since all of you have so many different roles, Kate, you are the experience architect, Jonathan, you are the staff product designer, and Levi, you lead the design systems team. So I would love to know everyone's opinion and experience working with design systems, and what role do design systems play in your day-to-day workflows? Kate, why don't we get started with you?
So it's interesting. I was thinking about this question earlier. And so I work with it, I'm not in the involvement in the creation of it. So I actually work with it and use it. And I used it this week because I was wireframing out the user flows for a new vaccine reporting app here. And it was so nice because I was able to just use all the components from the design system, quickly put wireframes together, and be able to focus on the flow and not like all the little parts and pieces and have to worry about that. And I was able to pull it together so quickly. And then also because we're using our design system, when we hand it over to the team that's going to build it, they'll know to pull all the components from what we have. And so it'll look like, I feel confident that it will look like how it's supposed to look because we're using this design system. So I don't know, that's me.
Definitely. Jonathan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I've had the opportunity to work at companies that have very robust design systems. So for instance, at LinkedIn, when I joined, there was a team of 10 people working on that with dedicated engineers. So it was really easy to use the design system. Everything was super well documented. But I was also on the other side where we didn't have a design system. Working at startups, you kind of have to build everything from scratch, and you don't have the resources to really build a full, as you kind of design things, you start building some of the components, but it's not like a full, well-documented design system with code components. So, and I'm now more like in the middle where I joined Okta, where we wanted to build a design system, but we didn't have the resources. And now we're to the point where we have a dedicated team, but it took, about 2-3 years to get to that point. And it just makes everything so much easier for me, for the designer. And also for the, for me, it's because I can the components are ready. I just go to the as a library, grab the component that I need, and it's very well documented. So I know when to use what, when not to use some component. We have a pattern library as well. And for the user, it's so much better because you have more consistent experience. And other benefits that come with ROI and things for the business, which is another big contribution or good thing about design systems. But we can talk more about that later.
Thank you. Leo, I definitely want to hear from you.
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess my experience day to day is sort of, I started out as the sole person working on the design system in the IT world first when I started out, and it was very focused on in kind of like what you think of typically as like enterprise applications, like a lot of stuff that's behind login you might not see, like the average person that isn't an IU student, faculty, or staff is not going to see very often. So you know how you pay your Bursar bill, a lot of academic advising apps, things like that that you use day to day maybe, but aren't always out in the world. So kind of what my experience has been is it's sort of changed over time, and what my day to day, what my role is can vary quite a bit but most of my work revolves around talking to people, helping them solve specific issues, sort of being a champion for the design system itself, and constantly trying to demonstrate the value of it. I think people get the value of it, but we're such a distributed and at a university model that's not one product that we work on or even just a few products, it's infinite products. Like I see products come into the world that I didn't even know existed that are using the design system. So it's like so it's a lot of person to person, I guess, like relationship building is mainly what I spend a lot of my time on. And now we're talking about a different level of scale that we're moving to now, because we were very focused on that initial group of enterprise software development teams. But now we've sort of shown that there's value in approaching things from this way. And so we've been asked to kind of build that up and do the same thing for regular websites and everything in one kind of monolithic system. So so that's kind of my focus these days, day to day.
Thank you, Levi. Yeah, that's a really interesting point that you mentioned, and we will dig a little bit deeper into that in our following questions. But my next question is, as you all mentioned, a lot of the advantages around design systems. We're really curious to know what would be some disadvantages of design systems. So yeah, this question is also for all the panelists. Kate, let's get started from you.
Oh, geez. Okay, so disadvantages. I guess it's more of a challenge than a disadvantage because of the way I work with a design system, but just kind of what Levi spoke to, like the need to constantly convince people of the worth of the design system, and that there's a lot of positives and benefits to be had in a consistent design, a consistent experience across all of IU's properties. So more of a challenge than a disadvantage, because I've loved using the design system. So I don't have much there.
I agree. I think just one thing, I see actually three things. I think one thing is, it's probably not a disadvantage, but when let's say you don't have a full team working on it, or you don't have someone dedicated to the design system, it's because it's not like a one-time thing. It's something that's always evolving. So it's sort of a disadvantage when it's like that, because you're probably using components that are outdated, or things that might not have the code for the component. Another disadvantage is when it's not well documented, and then it's just designers use it for the wrong purposes. And for more like robust design systems, sometimes can be blocking the creative process. Like sometimes you're like, oh, I need to use this component because this is what we have. But I feel like designers should still explore, and it shouldn't be constrained by the design system. So I think I see those three sort of disadvantages.
Yeah, I guess I would probably echo somewhat what Kate and Jonathan said. Is I guess all those things wrap up for me into sort of this term is like that I feel a lot is like the friction that a design system can cause. Although like it's like we can demonstrate the value all day long. We know it as designers and developers even also. Like I've had quite a few developers that were very like sort of prickly at first when we started to roll this out that have since come to me and been like, you know, I mean, I know it sounds cheesy, but been like, this is good. You know, this is working for us and our teams. The friction comes from, I think Jonathan specifically hit on it, where there's this, from a design perspective, you might run into these points where the design system hasn't really covered your specific use case or the combination of ways in which you might need to put these components together or whatever. And that's inevitable. It will always happen every day, like something like that happens. And that friction is something that you have to learn how to deal with and make space for people. I do this a lot and I have to constantly reassure people that it's like, you're not doing a bad thing, but when you have to break sort of color outside the lines, I guess we're going to call it that, like that is always going to be happen. You have to make space for that in the design system. And you know, if you start to see those patterns evolve and the people are doing, you know, sort of coloring outside of the lines in the same spaces all the time or in the same situations, then you know that's like a new feature, a new thing, new component pattern, whatever you need to add. So it's that friction is something that you do have to deal with, and it can be disadvantageous, I guess.
Definitely. I think those were really great points from Kate, Jonathan, and Levi. The next question that we have, I think we would really be interested in knowing your thoughts, is how do you get buy-in from stakeholders for creation and even establishing the need for a design system at your organization? I guess let's start with Levi at this time.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I think this is going to be different for every organization or a company, whatever. In our experience, it was a small, like it was an initiative effort that was not labeled design. Like we didn't set out initially to create a design system. But we did have pretty good support from, at the time, who was the vice president of information technology, Brad Wheeler at our university. He was always a very, like, he didn't know how to speak in terms of design or things, but he could recognize when stuff was good and when stuff was bad, and pretty reliably. And the department I worked in at the time was directly connected to the office of the vice president, and he basically said when he created that department, like, a lot of our systems are hard to use and bad. Like, can you make them better? And or try to start making them better. This is going to be a decades-long effort, but so he didn't know. He didn't say create a design system, but he knew we need more consistency, more clarity, and all those things. So I mean, it's, for us, a design system was, consistency is number one. I mean, people find stuff easier to use as it's more consistent. You know, that's sort of a basic UX, human and computer interaction principle. So we had good support in terms of buy-in, but what we had to do was on the ground with like I said, this idea of friction is with developers, with designers, even, like Jonathan hit on, like the limited creativity or exploration thing, creates friction. Developers wanted to use the tools they already knew. They knew Bootstrap, which is like, they wanted to keep using that, and they couldn't understand why we would choose not to use Bootstrap for every single thing, because that's what they'd used forever, and they didn't have designers on their team. So I think it's more, in our experience, or in our case, was building kind of consensus once we had the okay from a leadership position to explore with a small team. Like I said, it was like me dedicated to it, and then we slowly built up, is convincing the people who are going to be the users that it's a good idea and that they should want to use this.
Jonathan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Levi said. I think your design system, the way I see it is that it should be treated as a product. So, you know what the problem is, and you need to know who your stakeholders are, and you need to speak their language. So, if you're talking to a design stakeholder, you can talk about, the benefits for the design, consistency, better user experience, things like that. Velocity for the design team. But if you are going to talk to someone more on the product side, they're more like business minded. You need to talk more about ROI or return on investment. Talk about how this is going to save time, because now we're just going to need to build the component once, and then we can just reuse the code. So it's going to save a lot of engineering time, and that for them is always good to hear, because then they can prioritize other things and move resources around. But I agree, it depends on the team and the organization, like depending on the size and how much funding and resources you get. But the way I see is you have to treat it as a product, right? Like you need to see what the problem is. You need to find data to back up your the need, and sell it. You need to, that way you get the right funding, and get your design system going.
Thank you so much, Levi and Jonathan. Yeah, I think for showing the value of to all the stakeholders, why it would be a benefit for them. I think that's one way to like start off, and then like taking small steps, even if it's one person in the team, and then just keep growing from there. I think that's really helpful. Yeah, I think our next question is kind of more directed towards Kate. So from the stakeholders' point of view, for example, we have started working on the design system. So how does involvement of other stakeholders look like at this point?
So once you've, so I think I'm trying to figure out how to best answer this. I mean, to make the design system successful and to have good adoption, you do need to talk to a variety of different people. So I'm not a designer, but I can use the design system and I can understand the benefits of it, and so can writers. So I think it's talking to as many people as possible and showing them the ways which the design system positively impacts what they do. Because overall, like it leads to a more consistent experience, which generally leads to just a better customer experience, and that's what we're aiming for. So it's kind of talking to people, showing them importance, and showing them how what they do fits into it, and how their work can be used to just make a better end product. Because it takes everybody. It's not just, I mean, you can make it look nice, but if it functions terribly, it doesn't really matter. So, or if the words are crap, like, all the pieces have to be there to really make the design system sing. But
Definitely. Thank you so much for the answer, Kate. So our next question revolves around the interaction of design and code. So how does the design system move from design to code? What are a few steps that could be taken to build a design system from scratch and then kind of transition towards code? We are interested in knowing Jonathan and Levi's thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, this is a fun part for the design. I think I mentioned these before, is you need to treat your design system as a product, and it needs to be very collaborative with engineers. It needs to be very collaborative with PMs. Like ideally, your design system should be composed of sort of like a Scrum team, where you have a designer, or one or two designers, you have a PM, you have an engineer, and you have sprint planning, you have milestones, because it's always evolving. And having an engineer involved in the process, ideally it's more collaborative, where it's not waterfall, where you're like, oh, this is the design and implement it. It should be more, you're always working with the engineer to figure out, first you need to understand what framework we're using, where are the constraints, as a designer, you need to know all those things, so you are designing the right experience, or with the right constraints. And like any product, just I think getting their feedback early on is very important. And I think there are a lot of things that are part of the code, but are improving the experience. So, like for instance, like accessibility and using proper markup and semantic markup. So I think there is not like a time. It's like always you need to be working with your engineer. Bring them as early as you can in your design process and work with them as they're implementing the code. Just you can help QA the code. You can help providing feedback if you have some of that front end experience. You can provide feedback on the code. That's something I've done. So for LinkedIn, I didn't have to do that because the team was pretty big. But when at Okta, when I joined, we didn't have a design team. So I was doing a lot of the designing. I was doing everything for our components. So I'll do the research, the design, and the code. And then I will meet with the engineer, and then we'll like work together. And then he will eventually implement like a full working code, and then bring that to the design system repo, because that's like the design system code repo. But yeah, I think, sorry, long answer, but I think it should just be you should always be working with the engineer. And yeah, did I answer the question?
Yeah, definitely involving engineers early on. I think that's a really good point. Collaboration is really key so that we're not going back and forth and kind of being on the same page. Levi, we're also really interested in listening your thoughts, and maybe also what are some tools and technologies that can be used in this process? That would be really helpful.
Yeah, I think Jonathan touched on a real interesting point, like between the last job he had at LinkedIn, which had a really kind of big, robust team, versus like a little bit more of a scrappy, smaller team where you might have to do a couple of things. My experience personally has been on the much scrappier side, so I can talk maybe just a little bit about that. And that's oftentimes, I actually talk to a lot of different universities who are trying to do this, like start design systems, because they really need to. And that's always the question I ask is like, how do you get a dedicated resource or a team? And it's going to vary, but a lot of times what I hear is like just these sort of covert under the radar operations where a designer throws together some mock-ups of how components could work together, and they maybe get a day or so or 15 minutes with their engineering friend, who's just responsible for a million different websites and apps. So they have like a little bit of time and so they kind of like put together these prototypes. And I think that's a great way to do it. I mean, somewhat we took that route internally, except I met with I gathered all the UX folks within UITS, University Information Technology Services, and as well as some developers, and said, what do you need? What's the simplest thing you need in terms of a UI kit, design system, pattern library, whatever you want to call it, when you're starting out? And spent a few weeks off and on meeting with those folks. And then I feel like Jonathan and I maybe have a little bit of the same experience. I've kind of walked the line of like, I guess I would call myself like a design engineer, in the sense that like my background has historically been in UI, UX design, but I also learned along the way how to write front-end code and use front-end frameworks and libraries and everything. So I was uniquely positioned in that way to be able to gather all this feedback, sort of show these designers and developers what we could do, and then build a really scrappy first version of it. And as far as tools, so that process was rolled up going from design. It wasn't super formal. It was literally like me maybe sketching out things in whatever Sketch or Figma or whatever, and then being like, that's a good idea. Let's make a prototype of it, you know, and then building on it from there. And as far as tooling goes and stuff like that, I mean, man, we have a dedicated designer on our team now. Like my team is small. It's 3 people. It's me, 1 designer, and then 1 developer. And which is great. It's awesome. I think it's a good, like, we can't grow too fast because we're, you know what I mean? It's just, we're learning how to do this as a team effort essentially as we go. And, but, you know, we were looking at Figma, and Figma's got so much in it these days in terms of like, you can do things that you can do in the browser, essentially components, it's like auto layout stuff or whatever. And she had been messing around with that and showed me, and I was just like, wow, it's wild. Like she can design all the variants and stuff, and then we can code them up, you know, essentially. And then as far as code tools go, there's like we used like a tool that was called Fractal when we were starting out. That was like a pattern library generator, but it was also a place where we could draft and sketch out our documentation for everything. It has that kind of built into it. And we found, and there's other tools one called Storybook that's out there that, depending on the platform, like front-end frameworks you're using and stuff, is really nice too. It's basically the same concept. So there's tools like that in as this becomes more mainstream, quote unquote, there's lots of different little tools and libraries that are very design system focused out there. I can't even keep up with them, honestly.
Yeah, thanks, Levi. Yeah, I can't believe like it started off with a very scrappy team and a lot of iterations and feedback. But I've used Rivet design system and I've seen it, so it's really nice how like it's grown so much over time. Yeah, thanks a lot. So I think my next question is for Kate. Kate, what if you cannot find a specific solution to maybe your needs in the design system? Like, how do you navigate that situation? Maybe you don't have a component within the design system, or you need something different.
Yeah, that's a good one, and it's something we don't really have a formal process for it yet, but it's something we've talked about, especially with some of the projects we've done over the last year. But I think it's first, in my mind, it would be first understanding like what you're trying to do. So like the solution that doesn't exist, what problem are you trying to solve? And then making sure that there aren't actually any components in the design system that do that, but maybe you're not looking at it the right way. So taking stock of like, is there a different way I can do this? Is this solution the best solution? And then if it's really not, like if it's new, because new stuff has to happen, I think it's been working with the team and thinking through like, okay, well, this is a solution. Does this apply anywhere else? Because you want it to have legs and to be, if it's going to be part of the design system, it should be useful to other things, not just this one solution. And so it's kind of evaluating that and looking at all the different parts and pieces and from all sorts of different directions to make sure it's something that's worth adding, and then working through that with the team. What we found, like, it wasn't necessarily part of the design system, but on the project I worked on last, a website redesign, like what we found is instead of making new components, we could just slightly tweak what was already there. And so you didn't have to add a bunch of new stuff and bloat things, but you can make small adjustments that worked really well. So I think it's just thinking through everything and not just like adding. So it gets big and unwieldy. But
Yeah, that's a great point. I think having that balance of not going overboard with too many components, but still trying to think through if there's other ways you can still use the current system. That's a really great point. Thanks, Kate. So a last couple of questions before we jump to the questions we get from the audience. Jonathan, this one is for you. How do you know when it's time to update the design system or it needs something? When do you know that?
It's a great question. Always. I think that design system is, you know, I probably going to repeat myself a lot, but I see it as a product. You know, the product's never finished. So there's always new things happening. There's always, new requirements. There are always new code frameworks that you need to update. So, the more your product evolves, the more, the company grows, the more need for the design system you're going to have. So I think it's always evolving, and I think that's why it's really important to have a dedicated team working on the design system, because you're always going to have work. Yeah, can be documentation, can be adding to a new team member. You can have a UX writer now dedicated to, and so yeah, it's always evolving, and yeah, I can think of anything else.
No, definitely. It's always evolving, and things change too fast in the technology world. So definitely, there's a need to keep staying updated to that. Yeah, so I think last question from the panel for us is for Levi. Levi, how can we effectively scale the design system and promote the use of it, especially maybe if there are fragmented teams that are working in silos? How do we go about that situation?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm figuring it out right now. That's what I'm trying to figure out. No, but I guess like depends on your scale and what the top end of your scale is, and so we started out with a couple of users teams when the first kind of prototype versions of the design system that we created, and that ultimately scaled up to like dozens of teams, I would say, pretty realistically. But again, I really don't know, like how, because it's there and people can use it, and it's not like we can track who's using it and who's not, because I use such a huge, it's like, in the system, 114,000 students plus another 40,000 staff, faculty, you know what I mean? So it's like, and there's teams, all kinds of software teams embedded in there, and then website teams and teams that do both. So we're still figuring that out. We do know the scale or the scope of our design system is going huge. Like I said, we were more focused on the application development team side of it. So lots of things like forms and like small, more interactive data handling and stuff like that. Now we're like trying to increase the scope of that to include also the side, like the more marketing, static content, web-driven websites. I think the way to do that, really is, like I said, really in the first question, is talking to the teams. We did a lot of work early on within the organization to have open, sort of almost like office hours. I would say we did some town hall events within the cyber infrastructure building here. Was open to anybody on campus to come to for the first year or so that we were getting off the ground. So it was just me standing in front of, giving a presentation about the state of where things were, and then just getting nailed with questions from people who early on, there was a lot of friction in terms of why they would use it, and sort of pointing out all the missing pieces and stuff, which is like, hurts sometimes, but it's or is uncomfortable, not hurts, I guess, but it's very necessary at the same time. And getting some teams, promoting the use of it, getting some teams early on that can sort of be champions of it. That happened with us. We had a team like that heard about it and came to us and was like, when can we use it? And it's like, well, we don't even have it anywhere where you can use it. They were very eager from the beginning, because they didn't have any designers on our team, and they wanted decisions made for them. Like they wanted that. And so we found a team or two like that were and gave us great feedback from the very beginning, told us when something was broken, opened GitHub issues, did all that stuff, which was invaluable. And so if you can do that, I think that, poke all the holes you can in the design system, and then they can, that can help you a lot. I think starting, like, you have to do it incrementally too. It's like, we started with like the bare necessity and then moved up from there, and sort of our goals became a little bit loftier each time. once we got off the ground. So I mean, that'd be my biggest advice, is just do something that can provide some value out of the gate, and somebody sees the value in it, and then go from there.
Definitely, that's very insightful to know. And yeah, it's interesting to know how you conducted town halls and office hours in the very beginning to make sure that you're able to communicate or clarify any questions that people had around design systems. And yeah, I guess one other advantage that we see is that for teams who do not have designers, the design systems are extremely helpful as well. So yeah, thanks, Levi. Anyone else? Kate, Jonathan, do you want to add to it, or any thoughts you have on it? Okay. Well, let's move on to the audience questions. I'll pass it over to Fatima for this section. Yeah, Fatima, take it away.
Okay, so Q&A time, people. This is your time to ask all your questions about design systems and any clarification. Even if that question sounds dumb to you, I don't think that is. Just go ahead, because these people are leaders in the industry, and the only dumb thing you can do is to not ask the question.
I have a question. So I wanted to ask, what is like the process they follow to make a design system, and like who are the people that are involved other than like designers and developers, from the start to the beginning of making a design system?
Very good question. Um, who wants to take it?
I can
Mhm.
quickly answer that. I think it depends on the team size and org, and how much funding you have. But definitely, you need a designer, product designer, so they can treat what they're working on as a product. They can do the right research, the different variations, and ideally you want to have a dedicated engineer that can help you build a component. But again, depending on the resources and the time, they might not be dedicated to the team, but at least you can build that component, and that's kind of how you can start kind of building a library of components. But yeah, definitely, essentially like a dedicated designer working on the design team, at least one to start. And as the team grows, you can have dedicated engineers or a dedicated PM, or a dedicated UX writer. A researcher will also be ideal. But yeah, that's kind of what I think. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jonathan, for that answer. We do have a question in the chat from Bhanu. You were talking about the updates. I feel the difficult task for designer is to know when to stop designing or adding updates and take a step back. How do you go about that?
Man, I think that's a really good question. It's always, I think we hit on this a little bit earlier, but I think this is really highlights kind of an interesting thing that is hard to know. Like, I think we talked about like when you have to go outside of the system, for instance, and I think this is applicable here, where you have a finite set of components you've designed and you think that it covers, and then you run into a situation where it doesn't cover the sort of use case you have or whatever. And I think knowing when to stop versus when to design is, Jonathan said it earlier, like it's a constant thing that's always happening. But what I see this as an opportunity is, like, you may have stopped designing, but you keep seeing these different versions of the same sort of customization or the same, scenario where people have added on to the design system, or sort of tried to create something that that doesn't exist in the design system. And I think when you see that, that is when you know that it's time to start designing. It's like, if it's done more than once, this is sort of a principle in like code or engineering, if you want to think of it this way, is like, if it's repeated, once you've repeated it more than once or more than twice, whatever I guess would technically be repetition, it's time to abstract it and create a standard way to do it. So it's very similar, I think, in design. So if you see 3 different teams do the same customization, just slightly different ways, it's time to start designing again and thinking about adding that. But yeah, I don't know if you ever stop designing like it is really a product. There's always something, kind of to design or rethink, or a variant that comes up that you haven't accounted for.
Yeah, I think I completely liked how you answered that question. Design system is like a product and it needs continuous iteration. It's like the final high fidelity version of your product. It's never really done. You release it into phases and then you keep using it, and then you find out flaws and then you keep on iterating on that. So I think, yeah, that gave me a lot more clearer perspective of when you are actually done with the design system. The next question we have in the chat is, what are your suggestions on dealing with conflict of opinions among the team members regarding design systems? That's a very good question, Heenal.
I can give an example. When I joined Okta, we didn't have a dedicated design system team, and different designers were working on different components, and we sort of had a template of the things we needed to sort of fill in, right? Like, what's the problem, the lay of the land. So looking at the whole product and see where we're using a component that is similar, and start kind of doing pros and cons. And yeah, there was a lot of disagreement with different ideas. I think similar, like, just use data as much as you can, use research as much as you can, test it. Your audience is different. In this case, your audience is the design team, but you also need to test it with customers, more like making sure, it passes the usability test and is intuitive. And for the design team, making sure it just fulfills all the use cases, and if not all, but it's definitely a component that's going to solve the problem for not just one product in one area. It's like actual something that can be reusable across. So yeah, but just like, yeah, treat it like a product. Just do research, get data, see if anything that can help you validate. And that's, I think, the best way to deal with disagreements, and just in general, not just design system.
I would also just really quick add to that like, you'll oftentimes see a lot of times on like design systems for companies, they'll have this section that says that what their principles are, or something about it. And like, some of that stuff can just be really obvious, like make it usable. It's like, yeah, duh, like you don't want to make something unusable, but like at least internally, like you should have some agreed upon as a team, if you're working on designs, of what is it that you're trying to accomplish, and what are your principles of the team. Like, we tend to take the sort of the responsibility of use whatever is the least powerful. So if we can do it with HTML only or CSS only, we'll do that. If we need to bring in JavaScript for accessibility or whatever, we'll do that, but we won't do that unless we have to. Is a good example, I think, on our team. Accessibility is another. We have certain requirements we have to meet in terms of making our whatever we build, sites, products, apps, meet certain accessibility requirements mandated by the university. So that is one of the top level things. Like, is this an accessible thing to do? Can we make it accessible? If we can't, then that's an argument solver. You know what I mean? So things like that. If you can do that with your team, I think that's a huge deal.
Yeah, I completely agree with both of you, Jonathan and Levi. I think one of the things I also think about conflict of opinions is like talking through what exactly you are thinking and listening out the other person, and really trying to understand and finding that middle ground if that is possible. I think it also holds true to different situations where you eventually will have a conflict of opinion. But I think in design system, it becomes more crucial because it's something that you'll be using for a very long time. Yeah. So thank you for giving your thoughts on that. We have another amazing question from Yating. How to do research for a design system or some elements in a design system. And I think I personally wanted to ask, what are some places where you search for inspiration, which is closely related to this?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Um, this is your question, right, Yating? How
Yeah,
to do
yeah,
research for a design system or some elements in a design system.
yeah.
So, so yeah, if anybody wants to take that question, Jonathan, Levi, Kate.
I think in my experience, one one thing that's very powerful is first doing kind of lay of the land, right? Like this is what we have in the product. For instance, I was redesigning, or I wasn't redesigning, I was designing a toggle switch for the first time. Like we're an enterprise product and we didn't have a toggle switch. And because we didn't have that component, we built all these different one-offs of how to turn something on and off. And it just became, I found like about 20 different variations that could just be replaced with a toggle. And they were all very, inconsistent. Some of them were a drop down, some of them were checkboxes. So that's, one research you can do it, just understand the system, do a, check all the different pages, things that are acting as that component. Another way is doing a competitive analysis. So that's what Fatima mentioned, just like looking at other design systems. And, there are a lot of, this is, I think, something I found super, super valuable. And it's really good that a lot of companies and design teams open source their design system. Even if it's just their documentation, you can go and see and read their documentation. There are great resources. Shopify has great documentation. Atlassian, trying to think what else. IBM, even Google Material Design. So you can kind of start looking at all those components and just find what's, some pros and cons, and, what's something that's common across all of them. Because, whatever component you build, you want to make sure it's also, it's like a pattern that is recognizable. So, you're not inventing a brand new toggle switch that nobody has seen before. So, or like a new, interaction pattern that nobody has used before. So I think that's, one way of doing research. And another way of doing research is testing it. Just once you design it, create a prototype and test it with not just your designers, but also test it with customers. You can, do moderated studies, but yeah, treat it like as a feature in a product, and also test it with designers. Make sure when they're gonna be using the library, it makes sense, right? Especially with now like Figma, like all the different variations, things you can do, or like, abstract things like that. Just, ask them to use it. Like as a researcher, like give them that task to use the toggle in one of their features and see how they use it and see where the friction is, and just improve that user experience for them as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I think we have another related question. Elements cannot independently exist, to my understanding. Do researchers just ask opinions for pages with these elements?
I have kind of a specific example of trying to test that happened as early on as we were trying to test, because we would it was specifically, we were working on a date picker component or pattern. We weren't going to build a date picker, but we were looking for ones that we could reskin and use within the design system. It's a really like, date pickers are very like kind of boss level thing in UI design and development engineering. And so, and especially in the accessibility world. So we have a team of accessibility experts that are a university kind of resource, but they work directly with our team in testing. And so it was this same thing as like, they can't exist in isolation. Nothing, I mean, that's not useful. So we sent, you know, here's a test page with a date picker. Can you test this for us? And they're like, test what? Like, it doesn't make sense in context. So yeah, I think you do, in terms of research, testing, all that stuff, it has to be within context of what a real world use case might be. It's a really hard thing to do because especially early on, you might not have all the components you need to build a fully fledged experience, I guess. But like in the case of our date picker, what we ended up doing was creating essentially a fake form that had some, it was a fake out of office form is what I said, is where you could like put your out of office message in it, pick a date range from starting from here to there when you want to do it, and then have a checkbox essentially that says send it, you know, starting now, and then, you know, you could submit that form. And, you know, immediately we got tons of very useful feedback that from those accessibility tests. But before, they were just like, we don't know how to test this. You know what I mean? When it's in isolation. So yeah, you will have to set up in context. But you know, the good part is like you're building a design system, so you should have plenty of components to cobble together. You know what I mean? Like at least like somewhat realistic situation for people to test.
Yeah, at least putting up a basic page together that meets their bare minimum requirements. Correct.
Exactly.
I think we have our last question for the day panel. So it's, do you think design systems block the creativity of designers to explore different ideas?
This is like the hottest topic, and I think in the design system world, I think there's a blog post every week about this. I see like on Twitter or whatever. I don't know. I go back and forth because I mean, like I said, my background is a designer, and I go back and forth. Like it's fun when you're getting to make the components, and make the decisions about it. But then when I use them, I understand where that hesitancy in terms of, or this feeling of being trapped or constrained or whatever it comes from. I think one thing, and I was thinking about when we were talking about some other like going outside the lines in the design system, I think a lot of the good design systems I see have like sort of almost like trap doors in the form of they recognize that you're going to get to the point where there's not an existing thing in the system. So they do a really good job of documenting like the really sort of atomic pieces that make up the design system. So like you see this term design tokens a lot, which is like colors, font sizes, the very like really base materials you use to design. Like as a designer, you're using a certain amount of space between two things. That's a big part of design, right? You don't think that's invisible, but it's like if you don't have space between things, they might have, you can't use things. Colors, font sizes, your typography. So I think that there is those kind of things create a constrained environment for creativity. I think if they're done right and they're documented well. But yeah, I don't know. It's a hard question to answer, really.
Yeah. Kate, do you want to add something, Jonathan?
I mean, in the end, you got to think about your users. So like that you're working to serve them. So I have a design background, but I don't do that anymore. So I'm just like, if you want to do something fancy, I don't know, do it over there. Like you're working to make a product that works for your end users and supports your brand and things like that. So I don't know. I like design systems because it helps that and it keeps things so consistent and creates a better experience. So that's just me.
Yeah, I think, for instance, at Okta, our design system team always tell us to explore, right, different ideas. And and not to be constrained by the system.
Mhm.
And like Katie said, like Kate, sorry, it's all about the user. So if you test something and that's actually solving the problem, then take it to your design system team and be like, you know, I probably need to make a one-off, but at least you know that we have this variation of that component. So if for some reason in the future someone needs something similar, they can either reuse that or they can eventually make that a new component or a new pattern in the system. But yeah, I think also depends the level, because I think the design system has different levels, and I think Levi touched on that. Like there, you know, things like design tokens, and they're like foundations, and they're like just this little kind of going to the atomic design model, right? Like when you go to the organism level, I think that's when things should be a little bit more flexible and more adaptable, where you can kind of have a layer where it's like, this is the template, but feel free to explore. But I think when it comes to the foundations and more like the components, for instance, like input fields, things that need to be a little bit more baked in, I think that's when things can get tricky and hard to change. But when it's more at the organism level is when you probably have more opportunity to explore and evolve that pattern.
Yeah, that is correct. I think so I think there's no right or wrong answer to that. It all depends on the company, the organization, and the team, as far as I got to understand from what Kate, Jonathan, and Levi talked about. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I think those are all the questions for today. Thank you, Kate, Jonathan, and Levi, for being our panelists. This was one of the most informative sessions of the year that we had. For people who are already on the call, please give us feedback so that we can plan more events for you and have more better catering, better needs better events that cater to your needs. And thank you, everyone. Hope you have a great weekend.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Have a great weekend.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Have a great weekend. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye bye.